social constructionist element is the insistence that all of those things are culturally constructed. And they're not. So let's do that a bit. Let's review that a little bit. It's like elementary biology, I suppose. What's different between men and women? All right. Well, there's a variety of things. You know, the classic human embryological form is female, XX or XY. And the males are masculinized in utero by testosterone. So that's the first difference. And testosterone exposure in utero has quite profound effects on all sorts of later phenomena, psychological and physical. So for example, one of the things that higher levels of testosterone in utero seem to predict is less interest in people or more interest in things. And that's been well documented by research teams in the UK in particular. But in any case, so the standard morphology is female, but it's translated into male morphology by testosterone. And so then what do you get for standard morphological transformations? Well, there's the evident genetic ones, speaking technically. Obviously, male and female genitalia differ substantially, as you all no doubt know. There is some variation in that, although it's very rare. And then there are also other differences that kick forward, especially when puberty hits. And some of those are physiological and some of them are psychological. So one of the things that you see happening, for example, is that there aren't very large personality differences between boys and girls before puberty with regards to negative emotion. So that's trait neuroticism for those of you who are interested in Big Five trait terminology. And so people who are higher in neuroticism are more sensitive to anxiety and emotional pain. And women are more sensitive than men to anxiety and emotional pain on average. And the effect isn't massive. It's about a third to half a standard deviation. But it's massive enough so that if you look at the end of the distributions, where the extreme people are, almost all the people who have extreme problems with anxiety and emotional pain are women. It's running about 4-to-1 in terms of depression and anxiety disorder diagnosis worldwide. And there's no evidence that that's cultural. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, there are male pathologies as well. So males are much more likely to manifest antisocial personality disorder. They're much more likely to be characterized by alcoholism. And they're also much more likely to manifest attention deficit disorder and various learning disabilities. And so that also seems to be biologically predicated to a large degree. So, and interestingly enough, those differences, the personality differences between men and women with regards to trait negative emotion emerge at puberty. Well, why? Well, let's think about it for a minute. Now, these are speculations, but you can think about them and tell me what you think. I mean, they're reasonably grounded speculations, but I'm not certainly going to state them as fact, although I would say that the idea that these differences in personality between men and women exist, that's fact. How large those differences are and precisely what they consist of is still subject to some investigation, but it's extraordinarily well documented. So, what happens to men and women at puberty? Well, the men get bigger. They get stronger, especially in their upper bodies. And human beings are quite aggressive. We're prey animals we're predators as well as prey animals. And one of the ways that we defend ourselves aggressively is using upper body strength. So we punch, like kangaroos. There's other animals that do that. And we punch. And so what that means is that men are quite a bit more dangerous than women in, say, hand-to-hand combat. And that's actually a real problem. You see that manifest itself in part in a strange statistic, because it will come as news to most of you, but wives hit their husbands more often than husbands hit their wives. Quite a lot, actually. But it's a misleading statistic to some degree, because women lack upper body strength. They can hit their husbands and they're not really going to hurt them that much. I mean, there are men who are abused, and I'm not trying to make light of that. But one of the problems with having much higher upper body strength is that if you hit someone, you're liable to hurt them. And so male aggression in the context of a dyadic relationship, physical aggression is much more likely to be dangerous or lethal than female aggression of the same sort. And it's part of the reason I think that women are more likely to hit their husbands, or wives are more likely to hit their husbands than the reverse. It's because both the wives and the husbands know perfectly well that the wife is going to hurt the husband that much, so there isn't as much inhibition against the aggression. Okay, so now what does it mean for women that men are stronger than them starting at puberty? It means that women are at a disadvantage in physical combat, and that's part of the reason I think that their nervous systems make them more nervous, more anxious, and more susceptible to emotional pain. is because the world's actually more dangerous for them. Now, the world's also more dangerous for women sexually. Now, that's self-evident. I don't really think I have to explain that. I hope no one is foolish enough to try to disagree with that. The reason that sex is more dangerous for women than it is for men, obviously, is because women can get pregnant. And that changes their life completely. I mean, they may choose to have an abortion, but that in itself is no trivial matter. And as soon as you have a child, and that child is dependent on you, then your whole life has changed. And in more traditional societies, if you had a sexual adventure outside of the standard traditional structures, and you ended up pregnant, man, you are in serious trouble. And so for women to be more anxious and more susceptible to emotional pain because of their increased sexual vulnerability is perfectly reasonable. And the final reason I think that women are more susceptible to anxiety and emotional pain than men is because, let me see, now I may have lost my train of thought for that. I'll have to come back to that for a moment. Oh yes, that's it. You know, it's not obvious to me that women's nervous systems are actually serve to function in the best interests of women. I think that they actually serve to function in the best interests of women and infants. Because if you think about our evolutionary past, and for that matter, our present, you know, you're quite a different creature when you're a single person, male or female, than you are when you're a female that has an infant, especially an infant that's under about 9 months old. Because human infants are unbelievably fragile. You know, they're born in some sense way before they should be. That's part of an evolutionary problem too, because our heads are so big that our babies have to be born very young compared to other mammals of our size, roughly speaking. The gestation period should be longer for human beings. So because our heads are so big, the babies have to come out early, and that makes them relatively underdeveloped. And so they need a tremendous amount of care, and they're very fragile. And so it seems to be quite likely that women's nervous systems are optimized so that they're more threat sensitive and more sensitive to emotional pain because they have to be more responsive to infants and they have to take care of them, especially in their most fragile state, and that would be in the first 9 months. I think that tilts women's nervous systems hard in the direction of what men might regard as excessive negative emotionality. But you have to be sensitive to threat and danger if you're going to have an infant because they're very, very fragile. So I think those are the reasons. And there's lots of other personality differences between men and women.